very keen to play that down. To his point, Australia did support the aims of the war in trying to get rid of Iran's nuclear weapons. It did support the strikes, but clearly it's extremely apprehensive about how this war has played out. So he does not want to suggest in any way that Australia is contributing to it. I think he's very vague, clearly, on the conversations that have been had with the US and his complete total going back to all the time specific request, I think is pretty telling. It's obviously the US and Australia's not alone in this. I mean, the president is berating everyone for not doing more what he asks. So, and I think frankly, it's reasonable to do what we've done, which is be very vague about our commitment because, you know, heavens knows what the US is doing.
Yeah, I mean, well, in fairness, it looks like Donald Trump has a go at Australia when he's asked specifically about Australia.
Yeah.
Sometimes he's had a crack on Twitter when it wasn't relevant.
Well, no, that's true. Do you think, Osman, that the government is getting the balance right and not trying to get into a fight with Donald Trump over this, but offering what support we are?
I mean, the questions about the wedge tail are really interesting because that does add this dynamic that makes it not just about managing the relationship diplomatic. There are actual real practical decisions being made multiple times a day in terms of what information is being filtered to the US, or earlier that was also being filtered to Israel. Questions around what exactly is that plain offering. The line from the government, from Richard Marles, is it's just about intercepting. Well, he doesn't actually say this. He doesn't say it's just about this. He uses language that suggests it's optimised to be about intercepting drones or missiles that come to the UAE. It also has the capacity to then target the missile bases. Is it being used to do that? Is it being used to protect ships going through the strait from Iranian drones? Will it be used when it comes to protecting the strait once it does get opened up? So there's real practical military questions. The fact that when Richard Marles is asked by you, David, how that discussion with the US is going, and he says, I don't want to do a running commentary when Trump says publicly, I have not spoken to Pete Hegseth in a while, doesn't suggest there is really that much conversation going on.
Yeah.
I'm a bit fed up, really, with this whole, toing and froing. I just think that the Prime Minister and the Defence Minister could be a little bit more honest with the Australian public. And, my understanding or my assumption is that, we have not been given a formal request because they know the answer is no. They know the answer is no because of what the Foreign Minister Penny Wong has said in relation to we won't have boots on the ground and so on and so forth.
We don't want to be a party to the war.
Correct. But, I think that this is just a silly circular argument that's going round and round where they're playing word games. And I think it's too important to be playing word games. So I don't know if the Prime Minister has been asked this, but I would like to know when he had that conversation with Trump about the Iranian soccer players, what else was discussed in that conversation? Did Donald Trump say anything in that context about what he would like Australia to do? I
think it's kind of unrealistic, though, particularly with this particular president, to get too specific about what we're doing. At the same time, you've got the Defence Minister saying the relationship is fundamental to our national security. You don't want to come out and be too direct about saying, no, we're saying no to the US. I think that could have all sorts of other consequences. So that's why I think these word games are being played.
Cute, right? I mean, the other thing that Anthony Albanese did last week, which was quite fascinating, is he basically said, well, Donald Trump said he doesn't need us. That's what he said. And he was referring there to that tweet where, I'll spare the profanity. I can't remember which one with the profanity. But, basically Donald Trump said, no one's helping us and screw you because we don't need you. And so Anthony Albanese is sort of going, well,
there you go.
Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah.
In terms of the defence strategy, Jennifer, a lot of focus on the percentage of GDP and whether, we have changed the metric, the way now it includes military pensions and so on to do what NATO does and get a bigger figure. But as I say, most of the defence analysts have said, well, it's in the right direction. We need more drones and missiles, but it's just not enough right now. Richard Marles at the press club seemed to preempt that when he had a go at, what was it, the washed-up bureaucrats and generals.
Yes, exactly.
The cheap seats.
Obviously very sensitive about this, but I don't think there's any doubt. You've got, on one hand, the rhetoric of, the most dangerous strategic circumstances since World War II, and again, it's not just the Labor government that's done this, but then the lack of actual money going through. I mean, obviously, it's very convenient to talk about dollars because dollars are always going to go up, inflation and everything else. The constant talk about, $100+ billion more, etc., was, well, not $10 billion more, $50 billion more, $100 billion more, reminds me a bit of the discussion that Jim Chalmers always has, where he says, oh, we've saved $111 billion, etc. What they don't say is actually, yes, we've spent that and more somewhere else. So I think there's a kind of a bit of a word game going on here, and it's really to just make it obscure the fact that really nothing like the amount of money that we say we need is being spent, and nor is it necessarily being spent in the right areas.
There's always a bit of a confronting moment where you look at net savings in the budget documents.
Yeah. But here's the thing, you know, all these analysts will argue that, unfortunately, we're not washed-up bureaucrats.
Washed-up journalists.
No, that, you know, you need more now given the threat environment. But are we having the national conversation around what that's going to require? Because even getting to 3%, if we were to do that now, let alone next decade, or 3.5%, what are we going to have to give up?
I mean, look, this is the thing. Most defence analysts will say we should spend more on defence. That's not the most surprising thing. But the reality is, if we do get to 3%, even if you want to include the NATO definition, includes things like veterans' pensions, that sort of thing, that means that our federal government expenditure on defence will exceed federal government expenditure on education, right? Like, it becomes our third biggest federal outlaying of public money after the pensions and social security and after health. That's a big deal, right? And this is in the context of a budget where the government's already foreshadowing that it's going to be pretty tough. There's not going to be big spending in other areas. They might be paring back health spending in some areas. I think that is a conversation we need to have, and I think it makes sense to have the defence-focused part of the conversation immediately after the strategy's been announced. But now I think it's time to have a conversation about whether or not this is really what we want to be spending money on.
Well, we're only a few weeks out from the budget itself, so it's coming to the crunch. Just on fuel, Sam, the PM's been busy again this week in the region, Brunei, Malaysia. Then he cut short, came back to Geelong after the fire at the refinery there. Yesterday, Chris Bowen did announce some better news. We've got, what did he say, 10 days more fuel now than we had at the start of the war.
He's been a busy bee, Albo. He's been carrying around his Bunnings jerry cans with everything he can bring back from Asia. So, I mean, look, that is positive, I suppose. But, I mean, I think there's clearly a longer-term problem that we haven't.
But the point is, they're trying to show that they're on it, 100% focused on this and doing all they can right now, and the supplies are a little better than they were. Look, we are 3 weeks now from the budget, but also a very difficult by-election for the Liberals. They're at risk of losing the seat of Farrer to One Nation. So to win back voters who've been drifting to Pauline Hanson, Angus Taylor has gone for a new immigration policy, promising to discriminate on values.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Leader of the Opposition, Angus Taylor.
The federal opposition has unveiled its hardline migration policy.
For an immigration program to work in the national interest, it must discriminate based on values.
The opposition leader arguing those values are linked to where people come from.
Our nation has paid the price for believing that anyone from anywhere will embrace our way of life.
We judge you by who you are, not where you're from.
Signing the Australian Values Statement has simply become a tick box exercise.
Under the Coalition's plan, the statement would be legally binding.
Learning English would be compulsory.
Every visa applicant would have their social media scoured.
And making a safe country list to fast-track asylum claim refusals.
We'll decide who deserves protection and the circumstances in which that protection is granted.
The diatribe from Mr Taylor has nothing to do with the national interest and is entirely about sending a message to One Nation.
We are disgusted by the politicking of the Liberals today, trying to out-racist Pauline Hanson.
Australians are fed up with politically correct preaching on immigration.
If they want to pick up my policies, good luck to you, mate.
So what does everyone think on this? Is this going to make a substantial difference to the migration system, what's being proposed, or is this more about the tougher rhetoric on subversive migrants who are a drain on society, was the other phrase? Osman, what do you think?
I mean, I think it is so much more about the rhetoric than it is about the policies, because Angus Taylor really didn't announce that much when it comes to specifics, and a lot of what he discussed that he would do under a potential coalition government is stuff that the government already has the power to do. We already reject people from visas in this country because of things that they've said on social media. Tony Burke's actually been quite proud about his ability to do that, particularly when it comes to things like anti-Semitism and people who have negative views to communities in Australia. I think still it is really significant, though, that Taylor has made this statement. You said in your introduction, David, that this is coming in the lead up to the Farrer by-election. Federal Liberal MPs I spoke to who are pretty critical of Angus Taylor's pivot here have been saying the same thing. This is about Farrer more than it is about outlining what an actual Liberal government may do. Whether or not that will work, I'm less convinced. I don't think there is a lot of evidence that when the Liberal Party, or really any major party, tries to shift tack to sort of fend off the kind of right flank, or in the case of Labor, the left flank from the Greens, that doesn't really work. What Labor's been able to do successfully with the Greens is basically say, we don't like you guys, we don't like your policies, we don't think you're serious, we're going to attack you aggressively. It's interesting, though, that the Liberals aren't taking that approach, but are instead shifting closer to the one nation policy position.
But there is a general community mood these days about immigration being too high. So he's trying to do two things at once. So the idea of values, they don't want to say out loud, they certainly don't want to say out loud, we're going to be much more cautious about Muslim immigration. They don't want to say that.
But that is what they're
saying. That is the implicit message.
I mean, the lines that we heard from Angus Taylor around the problems, the Bondi shooters, radical Islamic preachers, the pro-Gaza protesters.
But
who's he talking about?
Yeah, but that is actually it's not just, you know, a small proportion of the population who agree with that. But the other issue, of course, is the numbers, and they want to say that, you know, the numbers are too high. Well, of course, who does that affect most? It affects Indian communities and Chinese communities, who are the biggest numbers. They don't want to say that either. Yeah. So that's why there's this kind of code going on. But to suggest that it's just an issue for the right wing, I think is wrong, because I think, you know, Australians in general, I think immigration is very high.
But Jennifer, they do care about the numbers, and it has been a legitimate debate for years around, is immigration too high? And you're right, you know, there's a strong mood right now that the numbers are too high. But this isn't about the numbers. That policy is to come.
Well,
it's about kicking out.
That's the second statement was about identifying groups of migrants as being subversive. And in that sense, there are also, and look, he did make this point, there are migrant communities who also have issues with the way the migration system works. It's not just about where you're born. But I think this statement, the risk for him politically is that even if you might have an issue with the numbers, it still looks like someone trying to say these groups of people, because of where they come from and how they look, are bad people, and I think that's a risk.
But I also think there's a view, partly because of the numbers, but that integration, in terms of the support for a non-discriminatory policy and high numbers and things, that integration has been overlooked as a very, very important part of the Australian culture. So he's also appealing to that, which again has quite a wide appeal.
And that picks up on a global issue, which is really quite fascinating, of in some cases quite progressive governments. I'm talking about Denmark and Europe and other areas that have made this really fascinating shift. You know, the Social Democrats in Denmark are obviously, I mean, they've just had an election, but they've previously been in, you know, these weird coalitions, in some cases with right wing. But, you know, you have communities that are generally regarded as quite progressive that have decided that there is a problem in the integration in some communities, you know, all of the things that have been going on in Denmark. I think that the issue for the coalition with this is that, number one, it underlines this great psychological existential crisis within the Liberals. They're completely obsessed with one nation. They really are. And you know, maybe they would be better off just talking about tax cuts and the economy. They feel that this used to be their stamping ground under Howard. Now it is one nation's. But I think that there is a danger that this policy is essentially too racist for you know, a huge group of community in the Australian community who are migrant or children of migrants, and then it's not racist enough for the one nation people.
So, just on the politics of this, I mean, Osborne suggests, it won't necessarily work in Farrer. Clearly, it's aimed at Farrer. But are there also risks then for, I guess, the Victorian state election for the Liberal Party later this year?
Definitely, yeah. And I think on this question of the Denmark point, or even, again, to go back to this idea of concerns some voters may have around integration, that can be the case, but Taylor went so extreme in some examples. Some of the things he's saying, like, if you come from a country where there's a dictatorship, your values don't belong in Australia, that would rule out a not insignificant number of Liberal MPs who currently serve in federal parliament. And that includes so many different...
Well, this is a point
Labor's already weaponising this, aren't they?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's kind of more the vibe than a policy. But on the other hand, We now in Australia have 31.5% of people who were born overseas. Now, that is extraordinary. That's double the UK, it's double the US, more than any other country except Luxembourg. So I think there is a genuine view in the community that services have, and of course it's then turbocharged by the whole argument about housing. So
there is always a subtlety to it, though, which other people have observed, that you do get migrant communities that don't want more migration, 100%, or don't want migration from certain places. Like, that is absolutely a thing. But the wonderful experiment that we're going to have here is that he's put this policy out, so we're going to look at the polling for the next couple of months, and we'll be able to see whether it works. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't.
By-election
we'll find
result
out
pretty soon, in just a few weeks. Look, just to circle back to Donald Trump, because there's been a lot of concern this week for his well-being after a Sunday night marathon, all-night session on social media.
Now, I'm often accused of doing.
Well, maybe he has. I want to show you the timeline of his social media posting. 9:03 p.m. his post attacking the Pope. 2 posts after that on a Democrat facing assault allegations. At 9:49 p.m, the now famous image of him like Jesus. A minute later, he posts Trump Tower on the moon. Between 10 and 11 p.m, a meme and 2 news clips. 43 minutes past midnight, he announces the start time of the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. 2:35 a.m, an article on Joe Biden. A minute